pleasure to be here in the great city of Iron Shoulders, or just outside the border, where real freedom lovers reside. And it is indeed a great honor and personal privilege to be in the presence of one of the great defenders of human freedom in the modern era, from whom you'll hear in a few minutes, the former president of Poland, Lech Wałęsa. In those days, the government shot at you when you disagreed with us. All right, I'm on the bench for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm assigned to small claims cases. I walk out of the courtroom. There's this many people in my courtroom, and they all want their cases heard before noontime, because after lunch I'm going to get a crowd the same size. The typical case is the dry cleaner ruined my dress, but he also tried to pick up my sister. So the lawyer says to me, "Judge, I need a translator. My client doesn't speak English." And I say to him, "What language?" He said, "Italian." I call the courthouse administrator to find out where the Italian translator is. She's working in another courtroom. So I say to the throngs, "Is there anybody here that can speak Italian?" Little guy in the back raises his hand. We swear him in to translate. We administer the oath to the witness. Here's exactly, literally what happens. Lawyer to translator, give the court your name. Translator to witness, what is your name? Let me see where this is going to go. Ask your next question, counselor. Lawyer to translator, give the court your address. Translator to witness, where is it you house? At this point, I looked at this little guy. I said, "I thought you told me you could speak Italian." He said, "I can, Your Honor, but my English, she's not too good." One time I was speaking a case in a jury, in a criminal case, speaking a jury in a criminal case. In New Jersey, the judge picks the jury. So again, you walk out into a courtroom. There's this many people in the courtroom. You have to find 12 people who have no bias, no prejudice, no knowledge of the case, no interest in the outcome, no familiarity with the witnesses. This was a drug distribution case. The state troopers caught a guy coming across the George Washington Bridge with a pickup truck full of cocaine. So I had a feeling some of the people in this courtroom didn't want to be on the jury. And I said, "Is there anybody here that doesn't want to be on the jury?" Little lady in the back raised her hand. She said, "Your Honor, I can't be on this jury because of my occupation." Thinking to myself, what could she do? So I fall for it. I said, "All right, madam, what do you do?" She said, "Judge, I'm a soothsayer." This is 1992. Who calls himself a soothsayer? So I fell for this. I said, "All right, madam, how does that keep you from being on the jury?" She said, "Judge, I already know how this case ends up." I should have said, "Tell us, lady, and save us the next 3 weeks in the courtroom." From ridiculous events in courtrooms to very serious and profound ones. Some men say the earth is round, and some men say it is flat. But if it is round, could the king's command flatten it? And if it is flat, could an act of parliament make it round? These words were uttered by St. Thomas More when he was serving as his own lawyer in defense of the charge of treason against him. And he was making a closing argument to the jury. The charge of treason and the eventual proved case of treason was his refusal to acknowledge that King Henry VIII was the head of the Roman Catholic Church in England. More lost the case, and as we know, lost his head as punishment. But think about his argument to the jury. Of course the king couldn't flatten a round earth, and of course the parliament couldn't make a flat earth round. So what is he appealing to when he makes this argument? Not only to the jury's common sense, but also to their understanding of the natural law, to their the foundational belief that the universe is created with certain laws that govern it. And some of these laws govern even the government. And so there are things that government would want to do that it can't do. He gave us extreme examples, like changing the shape of the earth in order to demonstrate his point that the government can't regulate the church. But the point was an ancient one, and it's relevant today. It had been articulated by Augustine and Aquinas, and eventually by More. It would be picked up by John Locke and Thomas Jefferson. The Jeffersonian version of what are the natural law restraints on the government, was written in the Constitution. Everybody in this room knows these words. All men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This means that our freedom comes from the Creator and not from the government. On that premise, we fought a revolution. People who signed that Declaration of Independence, if we had lost the revolution, which really was a war of secession from Great Britain, they would have been hanged as traitors. But because we won the revolution, they got to found a new country. Now, one of the things that the King and Parliament did, which was the last straw that compelled us to fight the revolution, was a monstrosity called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act required that every adult in the colonies, not in Great Britain, but only in the colonies, have in their homes, on every piece of paper in their possession, a stamp bearing the King's image. Every newspaper, every book, every legal document, every piece of correspondence, every invoice, even a poster you were going to nail to a tree or a pamphlet you were going to distribute in order to influence the outcome of an election had to have the King's stamp on it. Question. How did the King and the Parliament 3,000 miles away know if every colonist had the King's image on every piece of paper in their home? Answer, Parliament enacted the Writs of Assistance Act. This abominable piece of legislation permitted British soldiers to authorize themselves to write their own search warrants to enter a colonist's home. So it was not uncommon for a colonist to hear a knock on the door, and a very polite British soldier would hand him a search warrant in which he had authorized himself and his troops to enter the house. That would have been a felony in Great Britain. It ultimately became a felony here, but it permitted the troops to get in the home ostensibly to look for the stamps. Now, while there, they might help themselves to alcohol that you couldn't prove that you had paid a tax on. They might help themselves to furniture that you couldn't prove was made in the colony in which you were residing. They might also help themselves to the house, which is why we have the Third Amendment to the Constitution that prohibits the quartering of troops in a private home against the wishes of the owner. Some very bright students at the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton University, did some quick math, and the math spread throughout the colonies, and the math revealed that it cost the king more to collect the taxes than were actually collected. So one would think, well, why would a government enforce a tax in which it lost money? Because it cost them more money sending the troops here, breaking down doors, going through private property, the consumption of time. It cost them more money. Now I can see all these handsome faces. It cost them more money to enforce the tax than they collected it. Might it have been the wish of the king to extend the reach of his power across the threshold of private homes and into the most private parts of those private homes, just to remind the colonists that he was still the king? This was, of course, the last straw. The Stamp Act was rescinded. The Writs of Assistance Act was rescinded by Parliament. It was too little and too late. We fought the revolution. We won the revolution. We met in 1787 in Philadelphia to write a constitution. They wrote the Constitution in secret. But notes were kept by James Madison. It was the scrivener. His notes were so good that if you read them today, and they've been published, you'll actually get a blow-by-blow description of what was happening there. And his notes were so complete, they all knew he was taking notes, that portions of his notes actually became the Constitution. What was the first argument they had in 1787? One would think they wouldn't even argue this, but there was a big government crowd there in the presence of John Adams and Alexander Hamilton, and they wanted to argue that our rights come from the government. Their argument was that because we need the government to protect our rights, the government can decide when to shrink them and when to expand them, and therefore the government is the source of our rights. James Madison, who made the Jeffersonian argument — Jefferson wasn't there, he was the United States ambassador to France, so he was in Paris. That argument was the natural law argument. Madison basically said that, what are you guys, crazy? We just signed a piece of paper 12 years ago, in which we said that our rights are inalienable and come from our Creator. If that wasn't the reason that we fought the revolution, because we weren't going to have a king reaching into our bedrooms, and we weren't going to have a parliament that we didn't vote to contribute representation to take our money from us, and we weren't going to have troops in our cities telling us how to behave, if we didn't really believe that our rights came from our humanity, then what are we doing here? So the Constitution is enacted with the promise of the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. And some of those words to the Bill of Rights everybody in this room can recite. Like, for example, the opening line of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Now, I have often argued that the most important word in that line is the word the. Listen, I'll repeat it for you. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Why do I say that's an important word? Well, I've read the notes, so I know they struggled over that word. Because by describing it as the freedom of speech, the founders recognized that it existed before the United States of America did. Because it didn't come from the government of the United States of America. It came from the humanity of every person. Now, again, listen to the words. It doesn't say Congress shall grant freedom of speech. It says Congress shall not interfere with freedom of speech. And it does the same with other arguments, like your right to think as you wish, to say what you think, to publish what you say, your right to develop your personality. I've often told O'Reilly he should be very grateful for that right, the freedom to develop your own personality. Your right to worship or not to worship. And in the Second Amendment, your right to keep and bear arms. And my dear friends, that is not the right to shoot at a deer. It's the right to shoot at the government if it is taken over by tyrants. The great Fourth Amendment, unique to the United States of America, but we picked it up from our colleagues in Great Britain, which then was called the right to be left alone. Imagine being able to say to the government, no, you can't cross that threshold, leave me alone. Today we call it the right to privacy. So today, if the government wants to cross your threshold, the government, under the Constitution, would have to go to a judge and present evidence of probable cause of crime, meaning that it's more likely than not that on the inside of the threshold is evidence of a crime. And then a judge would decide whether or not to authorize agents to come in your house, whether it's local police or federal agents. Because no more of this self-written search warrant nonsense like the King and the Parliament gave to the British soldiers. All right. We elect a new government. We have two relatively peaceful terms under George Washington. And then John Adams is elected president, and Thomas Jefferson is his vice president. They didn't speak to each other. Do you remember how people were elected president in those days? Everybody ran for president. Whoever finished first became president. Whoever finished second became vice president. Could you imagine if we had that today? So while Jefferson is living in a rooming house, and Adams is living in Philadelphia because they hadn't built the White House yet, there suddenly appears throughout the United States something that we couldn't imagine today. Fear of the French. Somehow the country is afraid that Jefferson's friends, remember he was the ambassador to France, will move over here in large numbers and vote out the big government Federalists, John Adams and company, and vote in Thomas Jefferson as president. So over Jefferson's objection, the Congress enacts the Alien and Sedition Acts, which basically says we have open borders and we need people. If you want to come here, come. Buy some land, become an American citizen. Except if you're French, you have to wait 14 years before you can buy land to become a citizen. Then they added a very troublesome part to this statute, which said, whoever shall bring the government or the president or the Congress into disrepute shall be guilty of a felony punishable by 2 years in a federal prison. Note who's missing from that. President, government, Congress. Jefferson, the vice president. He didn't care what people said about him, and he said, if I ever become president, I'm not going to enforce this law. But think about the law. How could the same generation, in some cases the very same human beings that wrote, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, write a law, enact a law that in fact did abridge the freedom of speech? Now this leads to another question. What happens to people when they get into power? When they are the government, as opposed to candidates running for office? Do they say things when they're candidates that they don't or won't do when they're in office? Yes, unfortunately, which is one of the reasons we're here tonight. Congressman Matthew Lyons, an anti-federalist, a Jeffersonian, who represented Vermont in the Congress, decided to test the limits of the Alien and Sedition Acts. You see, John Adams, the president, had a couple of bizarre habits, one of which was to be seen in public wearing a purple robe. And occasionally Mrs. Adams would sew gold epaulets on the shoulders of the purple robe, and it looked a little regal and a little out of place in the United States of America. Adams also had another problem, not uncommon for middle-aged men, a problem with his waistline. So Congressman Lyons decides to mock the president's waistline and challenge the Alien and Sedition Acts. So he refers to John Adams, the President of the United States of America, in public as his rotundity. And the Justice Department arrests Congressman Lyons, and he is prosecuted in a federal court in Boston, and he's convicted for violating the Alien and Sedition Acts, and he's sentenced to 2 years in a federal prison because he spoke words that the government didn't want to hear. Now, the second part of this story, all of you will appreciate because you all live in or close to Chicago. You will also appreciate this if you're from Hudson County, New Jersey, or Boston, or New Orleans. These are places where the following events actually occurred. Congressman Lyons ran for re-election from his jail cell. And he won. Adams is gone, and Jefferson is in the White House, and the Alien and Sedition Acts don't exist anymore. Fast forward to about 10 years later, and we're fighting the War of 1812. Oh, United States troops thought they were in the United States. They were really in Canada. They got in a fight with British troops. Some United States Navy ships got in a fight with some British ships in the Mediterranean. The next thing you know, there are 10,000 British soldiers here trying to take back the colonies. They burned the White House. They burned the Capitol building. They're marching through the countryside, capturing real estate as they do. Well, about 50 of these troops were marching through a town called Upper Marlboro, Maryland, when they captured 6 townsfolk and threatened to hang them. The night before the hanging, a local militia invaded the British encampment and captured 4 British soldiers and threatened to hang them. So the mayor of the town, a guy named John Hodges, goes to the British troops, unarmed, without any support, and says, I'll make you a deal. We'll return our townsfolk, and we'll return the soldiers to you, you return the townsfolk to us. Captain agrees on the deal, the townsfolk go home, the troops go back to the British platoon. The War of 1812 ends, everybody's happy, the British soldiers go home. There's a tumultuous parade in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Mayor Hodges is the Grand Marshal of the parade. The one federal judge in the state of Maryland gives a speech praising Mayor Hodges. All the local governmental officials are there. Mayor Hodges is carried in triumph to a podium not unlike this, at which he gives a speech to a standing ovation. At the end of the speech, he walks off the podium, and 2 strangers come up to him. One of them hands him a piece of paper. The other grabs his hand as he receives the paper and puts him in shackles. They were agents of the federal government. They had handed him an indictment. Unbeknownst to anybody in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, the mayor had been indicted by a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. for treason, for providing aid and comfort to the enemy in wartime by returning the British soldiers. So now there's a trial. The trial is in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. The federal judge who presided at the trial was the one who spoke at the end of the parade that introduced the mayor. The U.S. attorney at the trial was at the parade. Defense counsel was at the parade. Everybody in the jury was at the parade. The government stands up and says, look, we all thought that John Hodges was a hero. Now we know he was a traitor. We shouldn't have sent those soldiers back, and the jury should find him guilty. Defense counsel stands up and said he was a hero then, he's a hero now. This is an absurd reading of the treason statute. This is how different the times were. The judge says to the jury, I want you to go across the street to the local tavern where we've reserved a table for you and ordered some liquid refreshment. And when you finish the liquid refreshment, come back with your verdict. Foreperson raises his hand and says, Your Honor, we don't need to go to the tavern, although we'd like to partake in that generosity after the case is over. We've already reached the verdict. What is your verdict? The mayor is not guilty. Now, what was this? This was the first example of jury nullification. This was 12 farmers, 12 uneducated farmers saying to the almighty federal government, you shall not pass. There are just some things you don't do to free people in the United States of America. And turning a hero who saved the lives of countless innocents into a criminal because of some technical paper violation of the statute you wrote is one of them that we just won't put up with. Now, there's a dark side to this story. And the dark side is that the Justice Department has had an unwritten rule from the beginning that for every prosecution for treason, the President of the United States must personally sign off on it. Who was the big government left-wing creep that was President of the United States in 1812 that signed off on it? James Madison, the guy who wrote the Constitution. So we are again presented with this issue. What happens to people when they get into government and have this power? I have argued, and I will argue and suggest to you, that they suffer from a disease called libido dominandi. No, not that kind of libido. Libido dominandi is a lust to dominate. Why is it that we seem to elect nanny-staters and do-gooders to the government who want to take the power that they have and tell us how to live? How about defending our freedom first and our safety second and then leaving us the hell alone? One night, you answer the door, there's a guy with a gun. He says to you, give me your money, I want to give it away in your name. You think to yourself, this guy's a crackpot, I better call the police. And then you find out, he is the police. You wouldn't let a crackpot like this take your money and give it away. You wouldn't let your neighbors take your money and give it away. Why do we let the government take our money and give it away? There are three ways to acquire wealth in the Western world. The inheritance model. God bless you. Somebody rich died and left you a lot of money. The economic model, where you work hard, you trade the sweat of your brow, the muscles in your arms, your skills, your intellect, your talent, your property, your time, to someone who will pay you for it. And then there's the mafia model. Give us your money or else. Which model does the government use? Let me get this straight. Social Security broke. Medicare broke. Medicaid broke. Amtrak broke. The post office broke. Why, when the federal government took over the Mustang Ranch, because they weren't paying their taxes, they ran that into the ground. So the same government that couldn't provide booze and hookers to truckers in a desert wants to manage health care. Story. One night, O'Reilly's assistant called me up and she said, Judge, Bill has an extra ticket to the Yankees-Mets game at Yankee Stadium. Would you like to go? Thought to myself, who the heck wants to spend a Friday night with O'Reilly? So I said to her, I can't make it. You want me to get rid of the ticket? She said, yeah, give it to somebody else at Fox. So I called up my then radio partner and Fox's chief sports guy, Brian Kilmeade. I said, Brian, I got a ticket to the Yankees-Mets game with O'Reilly. You want to go? He said, how'd you get that ticket? Never mind, I have the ticket. Do you want it? He goes, yeah, I'd like to go. So O'Reilly's chauffeur picks up Kilmeade and O'Reilly at Fox. They go up to Yankee Stadium, where there are 3 4-star restaurants in the stadium. They have this spectacular dinner, and they go and watch the game. Now, the Yankees and the Mets are like the White Sox and the Cubs. They're in different leagues. They don't play all the time. They play 6 times a summer. This particular summer, the Mets had won 3, the Yankees had won 2. This was the 6th game. The Yankees would tie the mythical standings between them. The game is a dynamite game. The Mets are winning the whole game. Kilmeade and O'Reilly are diehard Mets fans. The bottom of the 9th inning, the Yankees have bases loaded. There's 2 outs. Derek Jeter's up. He gets a routine pop fly into the infield. And the Mets shortstop, a guy named Jose Castillo, drops the ball. 2 Yankees score. They win. The Yankees win. The place goes crazy. This phrase, pull a Castillo, enters the parlance in New York City. It basically means to do the opposite of what you are very well paid to do. So on Monday morning, I see Kilmeade. I say, hey, Brian, how's the game? Oh, the game's fantastic. Yeah, I know, the outcome. What was your reaction? What was O'Reilly's reaction, since you're both Met fans, when Jeter hit the pop fly and Castillo dropped the ball? He said, oh, you weren't there when it happened. Where were you? Well, the Mets were winning the whole game. We left at the 7th inning. We were driving home. I said, oh, okay. So what was your reaction in O'Reilly's limo when you were listening to the game and you learned that Castillo, Jeter hit the pop fly and Castillo dropped the ball? We weren't listening to the game in O'Reilly's car. I said, all right, Brian, what the heck were you and O'Reilly listening to in the car while this game is going on and Jeter hits the pop fly and Castillo drops the ball and half the city is going crazy? We were listening to a rerun of the O'Reilly Factor. All right, back to the serious stuff. We are here for a very serious reason. We are here because we were created by an all-knowing, all-loving God who gave us one thing in common with him. And that thing in common is a free will. The ability to do good or to do evil as we choose to do it. When the government interferes with our natural right to make personal choices for ourselves, the government is separating us from the God who created us by taking away from us the greatest gift that he gave us. And we know he has given us this gift because we see every day how the gift is abused. He could certainly have stopped a Hitler or any of the monsters of the past century. He could stop some thug from attacking anyone in this room on the streets of Chicago, but he doesn't, because he believes that free will must be perfectly free, that we must restrain ourselves. Not be restrained by the government, but restrain ourselves. And we have to elect people to office who will respect our free will. I was addressing a group of congressmen, not far from here, but not in Illinois. I said to them, how many of you know that the Patriot Act permits federal agents to write their own search warrants, just like the British soldiers could? No hands went up. I said, how many of you in this room, as lawyers we are taught only to ask questions that we already know the answer to ahead of time, how many of you in this room have read the Patriot Act before you voted for it? None. The Patriot Act, which is 315 pages long, was given to members of Congress on their intranet, their internal internet, 15 minutes before they had to vote on it. How many of you knew that by voting for the Patriot Act, you were authorizing federal agents to do to Americans what we fought a revolution against the king because he authorized his soldiers to do to us? Answer, none. So we have to be very careful who we vote for, which is why everybody is in this room. We have to challenge authority at every turn. We have to get in the face of those who work for him, who work for us, for those we work for. And we have to remind them, the government works for us. We don't work for the government. The people. People are entitled to a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. The Constitution was written to keep the government off the people's backs. That's what we have to remind them of.
Yes. Right.
On the 26th of October, in the year of our Lord, 2012, 500, 600 freedom-loving patriots gathered in an auditorium of a hotel outside of the city of Chicago in the state of Illinois in the United States of America in order to celebrate human freedom. 50 years from now, 10 years from now, 4 years from now, will there be anything left to celebrate? Freedom lies in our hearts, but it must do more than just lie there. Like every muscle and every aspect of humanity, it needs to be exercised and expressed. We in this room have been granted the role of defending freedom in its maximum hour of danger. We must not shrink from this responsibility. We must welcome it. Thank you, and God bless.